And it's now my pleasure to introduce the moderators of panel 3, Tima and Mark. So the word is yours.
Great, thank you, Michael. I'm Tima Bansal. It's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces on the screen, as well as some names I recognize, but haven't seen the faces before, and some people I don't know. This is just a fantastic summit. We have an amazing group of speakers to listen to from a scholarly point of view. I want to start, though, by first introducing my co-host, Mark Smith, who is at the University of Stellenbosch Business School in South Africa, as well as the Grenoble Ecole de Management in France. Mark, you will correct my French, won't you?
That was
Say
beautiful. Hi.
So Mark is going to handle the chat and the questions that you will raise continuously, I hope, and prolifically. And I will introduce the speakers, so I get the easier job. We have 3 wonderful speakers lined up. Ivona Hideg is an associate professor at York University. She's going to give us that perspective of publishing scholarly research from the perspective of an associate professor. She's done amazing work on equity, diversity, and inclusion. So she has a lot to say on that. Andrew Crowley, who is currently the executive dean of Cornell Business School, Cornell Johnson School of Business. But that's just his current job. His new job is the incoming dean of Cornell's Business School. So that's exciting. Congratulations, Andrew. He is going to tell you about his experiences as the former editor of the Review of Financial Studies. Our third person, Jeff Hales. He's a professor at the University of Texas in Austin. And he is also, and this is the perspective he's going to speak from, is a chair of the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which has made huge impact in the field of accounting and responsibility. So he will tell you his perspective, all 3 consecutively for about 6, 7, maybe 8 minutes. And then we'll move to Q&A. Ivona, do you want to go ahead?
Of course. Hi, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you may be. I am very honored and privileged to have this opportunity to speak to you today. And today I would like to tell you a little bit more about my own personal journey in conducting responsible research. And this is going to be a very personal account and hence a very subjective account. And one thing I would like to do in this account is switch a little bit gears from focusing on solutions to highlight some of the obstacles and challenges that scholars in this field encounter. And as I said, as Tima said, the work I've been doing, it's kind of the equity, diversity, inclusion space. So this is the platform from which I'm going to speak to you about my journey and the obstacles I faced. So the most of my work focuses on, in particular, gender inequality. So as such, my work is very personal to me, comes from my own personal experiences of other women in my life and women in general. So these are lived experiences. And in my work, I defined a practical, impactful work that has impacts and implications for society at large. And it serves to better the society and lives of everybody in our society. I'm very passionate, obviously, about the work I do because it's very personal. My work is actually my life. I also have 2 young daughters. I'm hoping that through work that it's impactful is going to make this world better for them and for all other young people in our society as well. However, my journey in conducting this kind of work has been, at least to say, bumpy. And hence I would like to share some of the obstacles that we need to consider as we move forward and what kind of obstacles the scholars trying to engage this kind of work may be facing. So first of all, my journey begins in a graduate school, although it did begin before that, but in graduate school, this was not my primary area of research. And if anything else, I was actually actively discouraged, but our professional field at large from conducting this kind of work. And the sentiment was very benevolent that, studying anything gender related is very controversial. Any kind of inequality in the society, it's not really a management issue. And the various sentiments that I've received were, I felt for the most part, well intentioned, but here is one very memorable comment from a senior scholar in our field who told me once, you know, you are a woman and you have an accent. What else do you want to be stigmatized for in our profession? Do you want a job at the end, or do you want to promote your agenda? And of course, that instills some fear in me. Being a doctoral student, can I find a job if I continue this line of work? Thankfully, I had a very supportive supervisor who at the time did not study inequality, which did change later on, and I like to think I had a little part in that. He was very encouraging, and he said, okay, you know, he helped me push my work on gender along the side my other work, which was in emotions at the time, to have my dissertation on the go, but also to conduct work that matters to me. And he helped me develop papers. He was there to provide mental support and just to encourage me to do work, to conduct work that matters. And for a reference point, I actually graduated in 2012. So this is not an ancient history, at least I like to think this is not ancient history, not at all. So this has happened like a fair decent history. And I still, unfortunately, hear these kind of sentiments happening to other doctoral students. So at the end of the day, I was actually able to find an assistant professor job. And once I settled into my new job, which was at a smaller Canadian university, I actually decided to kind of forego all that well-intentioned advice and focus on what really mattered to me. I really want to have an impact on my life, lives of those that I love and care for in this society, but also for society at large, because I felt I had an obligation. I'm trained to do this kind of work. I can do this kind of work. So why would I waste my skills and training on conducting something that didn't matter? So this deemed to be a very risky decision at a time that I solely focused my work on inequality, in particular gender inequality at work. And one of the obstacles that, you know, the next phase my career was facing was actually publishing. Publishing in top tier journals, as most of us know, is you know, our currency. And one thing that happened was that published top tier journals very difficult, but publishing anything gender related at the time I found was enormously more difficult, like a whole different level more difficult. And in one of the papers, I still remember one of the comments. So I studied, so in some of my work, I've studied particular types of prejudice that women face at work, and it's something called benevolent sexism, in which women are very patronized, and you know, women are seen as wonderful, but perhaps not given the challenging assignments at work needed to advance, or not actually seen as leadership type. So one of the reviewers, I still remember this, I still have it here, wrote in reviews to this paper, I identify as benevolent sexist, and I don't see what's the problem with that. So what you study is meaningless, and you don't study real problems, so why are you wasting time, basically? I was just shocked. This is one of our top tier journals, and the action editor at the time did nothing to manage that. And eventually the paper did get published, but I had to go to social psychology, to top tier journal social psychology to publish this work. So, you know, fast forward, I did learn how to kind of craft my messages and publish better in our top tier journals. And I was very lucky to have a support of mentors and friends and collaborators who helped me along my journey. The other thing that I actually think helped in publishing was having very strong methodology. So one thing I realized at the end of the day, reviewers may not agree with my messages or the content, but it's very hard to refute the facts and the results that my work would produce, because it was a quality work that was hard to deny apart from the content. Also in my work, I tended to actually connect with other women in industry and corporate America and Canada, and talk to them to find out what are the specific obstacles they're also facing their roles. And some of my ideas came from also, you know, talking to actually women in the field and in the corporate world. So here is some ways how I managed to kind of, you know, push forward these kind of papers. So why do I share this story? And you know, I apologize for being a little bit more on the downside in this panel, but the reason why I really want to share this, because I want to highlight how difficult it is to conduct this kind of work. And I would say all work in responsible research, and that our entire ecosystem may be discouraging. And while the junior scholars need passion and persistence, the burden should not be just on them to pay pave the path forward for this kind of work. And we all collectively need to look for ways how to better overcome these obstacles and support our future leadership and future scholars. So I'm hoping that participating in this summit and by sharing my personal account and by listening to all other collective experiences and wisdom here, we take steps forward in creating a more supportive professional ecosystem for conducting and encouraging responsible research, in particular in our doctoral students. Thank you very much for listening to me today.
Ivona, thank you very much. I really appreciate that very personal story. So we're moving to Andrew Karolyi, who's got a really great story as well.
Thank you, Tima, and Mark also. I will not talk about my dean role, Tima, this afternoon, but thank you for the acknowledgement. Can I just say how pleased I am to join also with Ivona and Jeff, and I'm thrilled to be part of the virtual summit and of course on the working board of the RRBM, a newly elected member. Ivona's reflections as a scholar is just about the concerning challenges of publishing work with societal impact. Just reminds me of the fact that she mentioned the word ecosystem. It reminds me of the responsibilities that others of us have to play, the roles that we play in terms of knowledge creation and dissemination. And the one that I'm going to talk a little bit about is editors of our top peer-reviewed journals. I really do believe they actually can exert some of the most important influence on their respective disciplines. And you know, while they're often the most risk-averse among those in a discipline, knowing the responsibility they bear as the stewards of advancing science, I actually believe they can and should take the boldest steps to advance the research. So let me tell you a little story. I served as the editor and executive editor of the Review of Financial Studies. It's one of the top finance journals worldwide. I had an 8-year run. It was an intense experience. Just imagine an overwhelming submission flow of approximately 2,000 manuscripts per year. And enormous stakes given the precious intellectual real estate it offered. It's a less than 5% acceptance rate. I will say it was extremely gratifying work, and I had a marvelous team of fellow editors and editorial board members who knew the goal. The goal was to pursue excellence. So around about 2015, this is right around the middle of my term, I've been engaging with several organizations, major asset managers and owners. I'm a finance professor. Finance was my field. And networks of chief investment officers, chief financial officers, and others. And I often found myself in these fora being challenged as, quote unquote, a key decision maker, with the idea that they felt more attention should be devoted to topics of relevance, and that they felt, these people that I was interacting with, that they were underserved by the top academic journals, and specifically the academy. And they weren't afraid or shy about calling us out. And the one topic, you know, that they mentioned regularly, among many, was about climate change and environmental sustainability. And, you know, it's quite interesting because unlike the fields of resource and environmental economics, or even my many colleagues on this call who have come from the management field, who have been studying this for literally decades. Until that point, we're talking the mid 2015, 2016 period, there literally had not been a single journal article published on the topic of climate finance in any of the top journals in finance. It's shocking, I know. In fact, when I trolled around looking, there would be no working papers in process floating around. And so, you know, the shocking part is because even at that time, right around the Paris Accords, you know, COP 22, 21, we were talking about the challenges of having to mobilize up to trillions and tens of trillions of dollars of capital for mitigation and adaptation for climate change. Having to think about climate change related risks and how that might be or might not be priced in security valuations, let alone the whole potential of actions, engagement actions of asset owners or financial services firms for that matter, trying to affect change among corporates about things like greenhouse gas emissions.
Andrew, I hate to interrupt,
Sure.
but maybe a minute or a minute and a half left.
Thank you. So with the support of the Oversight Board of the SFS, the Society for Financial Studies, I took up the challenge. I started from the premise that we have a large number of scholars willing to pursue such big questions and wanted to find a path to a top journal. And we basically created a competition. It was inspired by our colleagues who are advancing the open science movement, Center of Open Science, and they developed this new editorial protocol called Registered Reports. The process was designed for a different purpose to mitigate publication bias, but the idea is to promote the evaluation of proposals, not finished papers, towards an in-principle acceptance in the journals before the results are known. And I figured that a special volume focused on climate finance could be just the ticket that could shift the risk burden from many scholars who might be eager to take on this topic, but saw no path, and imposing it on the journals themselves. And here's the punchline, Tima. What happened? We were blown away. We launched the competition in 2017, and we're incredibly gratified to get over 106 proposals from all around the world for the 8 or 9 slots that we had set aside for what would be this May 2020 volume. Over half of them were from outside North America, important fact. And here's my favorite fact: 2/3 of the respondents to this competition were younger scholars, assistant professors and PhD students. I just felt like the nascent demand out there had been unlocked. And so let me just say in closing, Tima, that while those papers have been published now over a year, they've done very, very well in terms of citations. They've gotten a bunch of media impact. The most gratifying thing for me is to see that literally now there are dozens and dozens of published and working papers focused on climate finance. And they are being witnessed by multiples of sessions at major conferences in finance devoted to the subject. And so the message in the end here is, dear friends, scholars, especially younger ones, they're eager to pursue this societally impactful research. I know it, I saw it. And those in leadership roles in our associations, in our journals, in dean suites, we can influence things. Yes, there's pressures to be conservative and play safe, but we do have the power to wield to maybe unleash this. And I encourage you all, if you are in such roles, to be bold. Thanks, Tima.
Andrew, thank you. We have high expectations with you as Dean of Cornell to unleash some of that impact and good research. Thank you. Jeffrey Hales, you will have 8 minutes maximum with no time for questions then, but do what you can, Jeff. You've got a good story as well.
Thanks, Tima. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So, kudos to Ivona and Andrew for sharing their personal stories in this journey as scholars. And so I'm going to do the same thing, tell a little bit about my, like what I've been able to do as a scholar to help to have, to pursue societally impactful research. And so I'll just start by saying, relatively early in my career, I focused on standard setting. It was something I was asked to teach, and there's a very natural cycle between where we spend our time in the classroom and what we think about. And so for me, that directed me to standard setting. So I had to learn more about what was going on in practice in order to teach the classes I was being asked to teach. At the time, I was at Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech didn't have a traditional sabbatical program, but I did get the opportunity to take a year off to visit the Financial Accounting Standards Board, which is like the major accounting standard setter in the US. And so they've got a great program, a design that minimizes transaction costs for scholars that want to do that in accounting, really. But it's a great, if anybody's interested in that, we can talk offline about ways that could be structured to make it really easy for universities to buy into. But what was really important, this goes back to Ivona's point a bit, is that actually Georgia Tech supported me, and my senior colleagues there were supportive of me leaving full-time for a year, and they're covering my classes, etc. If they hadn't been, I'm not sure I would have had the vision or tenacity to pursue that. So I really needed that. And I see Ajay's here, Ajay Kohli, so one of my senior colleagues at the time. So thank you to Georgia Tech for supporting that, because that year that I spent there as a full-time fellow really helped me to understand practice, the cutting edge issues in accounting. And that, of course, led to, probably not surprisingly, like actually some top publications, but like that is vastly understating the impact it had on my career, because it profoundly altered my teaching and my research. I didn't think about research questions the same way. I didn't teach classes the same way before. And in some ways, like I stopped looking to other accounting, just like the accounting journals, for understanding what I should focus my research on. I started actually looking to what was, the debates in practice, and what do we need to know to set better policies and standards. And so I think that was really transformative. And then 3 years later in my career, I got the opportunity to be involved in a nonprofit standard setting startup. And if you know anything about nonprofit startups or standard setting, they're all underfunded. And so it was like a really sort of fun journey. But from 2012 to 2018, I was working with the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, trying to help them in this mission of finding a way for companies to be able to report on their impacts that they're having on society, primarily through the lens of what investors need to know about that, in terms of like that part of impact that is going to come back in the short, relatively short term and affect investors' decision making. And so things that companies need to manage today. And so, over that 6-year window, SASB developed 77 industry standards. It was a huge effort. In 2018, when those standards were initially finished, we had 40 companies. By the end of the year, we had 40 companies that were reporting, 40 SASB reporters by the end of that year. Just over 2 years later, we have more than 800, and it reflects about a third of the S&P Global 1200. And I think, and that's early in the year. Most of these reports aren't even out yet, so I'd expect it to be a big year this year. So it's, again, this involvement with practitioners has helped to have like a transformative impact on my teaching and my research. And personally, especially being involved in sustainability efforts, has been hugely personally rewarding. So, I think the thing that has most opened my eyes up to is that we need to know. There's so much that we need to know about how companies can operate in a way that is socially responsible, that is sustainable. As an accountant, information is really, really important. What gets measured gets managed, and what we've largely been measuring are things that companies can control. The cash that they have on hand, the inventory that they have, the buildings that they operate. But there are so many other things that businesses do that have impacts on society and on the environment. And we have not been very good about measuring those things. And so as a result, I think there are a lot of questions that we don't know the answers to in terms of what it takes to actually, operate in a way that is sustainable over the longer period. And so we're right on the cusp of a sea change in terms of what regulations, policy, standards are going to require, allow, and encourage among companies. And so there's going to be a ton of really, really important questions for us as an academy to direct our attention to. And so, one of the things I would say, I think, what gets measured gets managed. And I'll just caveat that by also saying every measurement is wrong. And I've heard some of the discussions around like, how do we measure impact among our faculty, and how do we encourage it? I think you have to measure it, but you also have to sort of caveat it that like all of the measurements that we come up with are going to be wrong. And so that's okay. We just need, it just points out that like how much we need to begin to study and continue to study these really important questions, because we want to help managers run businesses better, customers make better decisions, investors allocate their capital more effectively, policymakers to write better regulation, and laws, and there'll always be unintended consequences. And so what we really need is our deans and our editors to create opportunities and space for responsible scholarship to thrive. And so it's great to be part of this today. I'll go ahead and stop there and turn it back to Tima.
I have to say, the three of you are so inspiring, that you're all pioneers and pushing your own fields. You, Jeff, and with SASB in accounting, Andrew, with you in finance and the journal editing, and then of course Ivona with her inclusion and diversity research, and especially writing about issues that are so personal. And you can see that even in the way that she talks about those issues. So I'm going to now hand it over to Mark, who's going to field some questions for about the next 10 minutes.
Thanks, Tima, and thanks everybody for the questions in the chat. I wanted to perhaps go back to the start and start with the start chronologically of the talk, and also the start chronologically of your lives, because Ivona talked about a calling, and Jeff's story talks about a kind of a calling, or the formative years when he was a researcher. And Ivona mentioned about felt there was an obligation to do that kind of research, but how do we know if the calling that individuals have is going to be impactful and relevant for society? Should we let individuals do the research that is their calling and then seek that impact afterwards? Ivona, do you want to start?
Yes, yeah, I'm here. So obviously this is something that was personal to me and I felt was calling, but I also felt women make up half of our population. So if that's not impactful work, then I don't know what it is, to be honest. It's impacting a large black population. And I think inequality across the globe, be it gender, be it racial, be it socioeconomic, we see a lot of inequality. So we are nowhere even close to that. So I think for me, this was not a question whether this would have an impact. Of course, this kind of work impacts not, and to me, it was personally impacts a large chunk of our society. And hopefully, although I do study most of my work in North America, but hopefully some of this translates across the globe. Because the other concern I usually have with our work is that we are very North American. We just study what's relevant to our North American, or I would say Western economy societies. But I think there's some issues that I've studied, and especially in the gender space, relates to women in all kind of economies. And so I think this is a very personal and biased account why I think this matters, but maybe it's just sheer numbers. Women make up half of our population, even a little bit more. So
thanks. And you, Jeff, was your calling to measure impact of businesses, was that something you knew would be important when you started, or was it has it become that?
So I would sort of like, there's this question of like, should we say like follow your passion and hope that it's impactful, or what I would say take more of like a pragmatic approach, which is that every great opportunity I had in my career, from who I worked with as a doctoral student to the involvement at SASB, was not something I had anticipated. I actually had a very clear sort of alternative path leading into it. And so, I think I found passion in things that were impactful and meaningful. And so I think what junior faculty really need is like, they need guidance to realize like there are opportunities, help create space for them to discover things that are cutting edge. They're going to want to study things that are impactful. They'll find their passion in that. I don't think it's not really an either or. Help them to feel supported in it, and the things that they find passion in will be, I think, pretty impactful.
And Andrew, your calling to be a climate activist, if I can call you that, did that?
I'll take it, actually, Mark. Thank you.
Did that come?
I'm a science advocate, is what I am, and what we were is in a situation with basically a depletion of science. People just didn't see the opportunity. They didn't see a path. And what I have had in a number of instances is a bunch of individuals, particularly from outside of North America, just feeling like they couldn't pursue their passion. They didn't see the way forward because there was no opening, there was no space. They had not seen the space in the top journals devoted to it. They just needed to see the opportunity was there. So I don't know how to unravel the chicken and egg problem that the question begets, right? But I believe that the groundwork had been laid, and like I said, the gratifying thing was that so much of outside of North America was clearly passionate about this, and they wanted to respond. and that it was mostly younger people, younger scholars in the profession that were ready to jump were they to see the path. So that's to me what was the most gratifying of the whole experiment.
So maybe I can stay with you, Andrew, because one of the questions in the chat was rather directly, why don't editors publish responsible research? Do they believe there's a supply problem? So your story demonstrates there's not a supply problem, but do you think that goes beyond the focus of your particular what you've been doing?
No, it's a great question, Mark, and I'll keep it short because I know time is short. There's no question that I received indirectly through many parts of my field of finance concerning comments about the innovativeness of this registered report protocol, because it deviated from what we were doing before. And we were very, very focused on the ways in which we're doing things in the careful double-blind peer review process, and sort of change is not easy to be had. You know, while, you know, this is a very positive sounding story that I'm sharing with you, I'm not talking to you about some of the pushback that I heard or indirectly heard through others about the fact that this was not necessarily a welcome thing. I hope that boldness is not to be undervalued going forward. I hope that people continue to respond. I think that we collectively, everybody, all 200 people on this call, can actually affect change by talking about this with editors that they know, with their dean's offices. Because I think it feels like there's momentum here now, so that there's no need for the big pioneering events. There's momentum here afoot.
Thanks, Andrew. Can I take that point about the review or the journal process because that's something that Ivona picked up about the pushback that she had in terms of reviews. And a couple of the questions in the chat were, do you think a more open review process would have helped you, Ivona, in terms of a transparent process in your initial resistance that you faced?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure that open review process necessarily is required for this, but what we require is a change in attitudes. And I think a lot of reviewers are like, we're all human beings. We all have our prejudice, including myself and all of us. So this is not unique to some reviewers. This is all of us. I think being a little bit more aware about these issues and how they impact work, and educating reviewers about the potential biases they may be bringing to the table when they're reviewing, and educating the boards, educating associate editors. We are all human beings. So I just think a more awareness and education about how these kind of reviews, which they may not think they're biased, but how these things may creep into more biased reviews and hence prevent some kind of work more than other kind of work to be published. So I think education awareness is a big process, and being just open is not going to change that. People will be just act more in socially desirable way rather than addressing the root cause problem.
And Andrew, as an editor, how do you feel like that opening out that review process?
I was responding to Ajay in the chat because who's asking about the concerns that I mentioned earlier, and I'll just say it out loud. The concerns were essentially about this more open review process that was advocated by the Center for Open Science and the open research movement, was simply that it's different. It's untested, it's new, and again, from the perception of many of my colleagues, which I respect tremendously, the real estate is incredibly precious. So the risks, you know, there's sort of an asymmetric loss function here. To be bold, taking risks with precious real estate is something that some people were very uncomfortable with, and they let me know. But can I just say one more thing, which is I never lacked support from the leadership of the association and the society that oversaw the journal. They saw the vision of trying something different and new for the greater good that it would serve. And I must give them tremendous credit. And I believe there are other such association leaderships out there as well.
Thanks, Andrew. Just to finish off on that transparency question, to come to you, Jeff, because you obviously bring transparency with your measurements. But in reaching out to stakeholders, what sort of tips would you have just to finish off for other academics who want to make that quite scary reach out to those folks out there that don't talk to us normally?
I think just you'd be surprised how willing they'll be to support efforts. Just like a little quick anecdote. I happen to see a friend on social media who works at an aluminum company, and I've been working at UT with some, the engineers working on battery development. And so I just tried to make a connection because I knew that they needed some materials for this doctoral student's work. And within a matter of a few days and a few emails, suddenly this company was sending aluminum to UT for research on battery development, which is going to be hugely important for a transition to a low carbon economy. So I think just you'd be surprised how often there's opportunities if you just take the initiative.
Excellent. I think what all three researchers show is the need and the rewards to being audacious and bold. And I will boldly hand back to Tima, still on time.
Well done, Mark. Fantastic moderating. I just want to say, when we organized the panel, we asked Ivona, Andrew, and Jeff to give us their personal stories. And I have to say the storytelling was really engaging. So thank you to all three of you for not only what you did here, but then what you're doing in the background in your own professions. We're back